Well, hello, connections. This is my second looking ahead video. And this week we continue our series, Daring to Draw Near, by looking at the role of the Holy Spirit in helping us draw near to God. And I think that's going to be fitting because it's going to be Pentecost Sunday, this upcoming Sunday. And, sometimes I think Christians forget that one of our major one of the major works of the Holy Spirit in our lives is to assure us that God is our Father and that we are his very own children. We're safe as children in God's household. Now, adoption is very special to me because my late wife Lisa and we adopted Nadia from Haiti back in 2007. And in fact, you see a picture of me there, much younger than me, in 2007, as we went to pick up Nadia. And she was every bit as much a part of our family as all of our boys. So this coming Sunday, our text is Romans 8:14 through 17. And I just want to read verse 15 today and think about that as we look ahead for Sunday and start to begin to grapple with some of the truths that are in this passage. So verse 15, it says, "The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father." So we're going to look at, there's a number of different ideas there that deserve some deeper study. But right now I want to just look at Roman slavery, because when they talked about slaves, that wasn't just a metaphor. There were in fact, you can read Romans 16, the last chapter of Romans, and it's clear that there are some slaves, common slaves, slave names like Urbanus were found. A man by the name of Urbanus was part of the Roman congregation. And so there were probably 30 to 40% of the church was made of slaves. And so let's understand what that term, no longer slave to fear, how we can understand that phrase by understanding Roman slavery a little bit better. So first of all, Roman slavery was in some ways just a lot better kind of slavery than slavery in the American South before the Civil War, which is probably the slavery most of us are familiar with. American slavery at that time was based on race, and it was a horrible, horrible kind of slavery. Roman slavery wasn't really based on race. Furthermore, if you were a city slave, like the slaves in the Roman church, or the slaves in Ephesus or Alexandria, then you were treated fairly well. You could earn money, you could pay your way out of slavery. But even though you were treated better than the slaves we know of in the South, the slaves still had a pretty difficult situation, a difficult life. They never had the same privileges as a child in the household. And furthermore, they were always living in fear. I mean, if a house slave in Ephesus got hurt, then plenty of masters would just immediately sell them and sell them at a discount. And so if a slave broke his arm, he would most likely cry, but he'd cry out in fear. He would cry out, "I broke my arm. I'll probably get sold at a discount and have to work in the salt mines." And slaves who worked in the salt mines did not live very long, and they were subject to as bad a treatment as slaves at any period in history. But so that all slaves lived with a fear of what the future might hold for them. But a Roman child, they didn't get afraid about the future in that way. They never worried if they got hurt and they cried out that their dad would sell them from the household to work 18-hour days in the salt mines. Never had to worry about that. In fact, if a child got hurt, it would cry out confident that when they cry out, "Daddy," or mommy, their parents would jump into help mode. Now, many religions of the world, the participants of the religions view themselves as servants, and they view their false god as a master that they've always got to try to appease. Now, Christians, we do view ourselves as servants too, but our most basic identity is child of God. Behold, what manner of love God has for us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. 1 John 3, verse 1. And so being a child of God is basic to our identity as a Christian. In fact, as J.I. Packer calls it in his great book, Knowing God, it's the highest privilege of a Christian. And so it's just so clear when we talk about this idea of drawing near, daring to draw near, that your view of God is going to determine how quickly you approach him. If you view God as a picky master who lives in a universe far, far away and who's just looking over your life to see if you mess up, then you're going to be very afraid to bring your cares to a God like that, because you're going to be afraid that you'll be kicked out of the family. And so as we approach Pentecost Sunday, think about that phrase, by the Spirit we cry, Abba. That's Hebrew for father, actually for like daddy. Very, very intimate term. And, one of our special Reformed confessions is this, the Heidelberg Catechism. And catechism is a question and answer, a basic summary of the Christian faith in a question and answer format. And so question and answer 120 of the catechism basically asks us why Christ commands us to call God Father. And the answer is this, that at the very beginning of our prayer, Christ kindles in us by his Spirit what is basic to our prayer, the childlike awe and trust that God, through Christ, has become our Father. Our fathers don't refuse us the things of this life. So if that's true about them, how much more will our God, our Father, even less refuse to give us what we ask for in faith? And I just think that that's such a wonderful privilege. And I want to invite you, as you think about this passage in the week ahead, to just think about the difference it makes that the God we approach is not some cruel taskmaster, but rather he is a loving Father who is disposed to give good things to us. Thanks.